on the T would be great. Apparently, the computer couldn't find Justin's camera or mic, and I don't know where Meredith is, so I'm just gonna see what happens here. But the stream's up and working. That's good. Love you. Thanks. I guess I should mute the mic. Welcome to election night. Over the last several weeks, people have been casting their ballot, whether in the mail, dropping it off, or even standing in line. Tonight, we're going to hear the quiet power of a vote. Well, the results for you, expert analysis, and more. So join us over the next 2 hours as we cover the local races. You're watching BoiseDev.com's coverage of the Growth Vote live.
You are watching a BoiseDev live presentation, The Growth Vote 2020. Featuring our expert panel, Margaret Carmel, Meredith Stead, and Justin Core. Presented by Holland & Hart. Holland & Hart is a full-service AmLaw 200 firm delivering integrated legal solutions to local, regional, national, and international clients of all sizes. Their Boise office has deep roots in Idaho, with sophisticated experience to handle the most complex issues. The Growth Vote 2020. Now here's your host, Don Day.
Hi everybody, we are live on the internet and it is 9 o'clock, which means the polls are closed in North Idaho. BoiseDev's Margaret Carmel joins me and it's just us. Margaret, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad we could talk about just Idaho tonight. I know the world is watching what's going to happen across the country, but it's great that we can just focus on what's happening here at home.
Yeah, and you know what?
Right.
We've been having some technology issues, but I have good news. Our good friend Justin Core is now here. We're battling through. Justin, how are you? Oh, can't. Oh, I gotta unmute him. There we go. Hey, Justin, let's try that again. Oh, I still can't hear him. That's okay. Well, hopefully that'll come together. I think Margaret had to there was like a mute setting on the screen, Justin, that you might have had to push. See, this is why we do these things, so we'll give Justin a second. But you know what's interesting is we actually don't really have a lot of results yet. The polls just closed in the north part of the state, and they don't show a lot, but we can show some early results. So how about we do that? What do you think, Margaret?
That sounds great.
Okay, so we're going to look in on Aydah County here. And, you know, I think the race that a lot of people locally are watching is this commission race between Diana Locciondo and Ryan Davidson. Margaret, you did some stories on this. Boy, we've got an early lead for Diana Locciondo. It is early, but there's a pretty sizable lead right there.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. This has been a really hard-fought race. Commissioner Locciondo took the seat in 2018 and flipped the commission Democratic for the first time in a number of years. And while she's been on the commission, she's been a part of certain things like instituting impact fees in the county, which is about to start here soon, as well as putting away some funds to build a new coroner's facility and an expansion of the jail. Some of these policies have been controversial with Republicans, especially in recent weeks with the spending plan of how the city or how the county is planning to pay for those projects, or even their necessity at all. But the thing that has really put a lot of focus on this race has been the COVID-19 issue. Locciondo is on the board for Central District Health, and she has voted for lockdowns, as her opponent Ryan Davidson calls them, in order to control the virus. So she has been kind of maligned by some conservatives around the county as being extreme and, you know, for government overreach because of these measures that closed bars or mandated masks, meant to slow the spread of COVID-19.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that throughout the night. Let's look at some of the other races. This is District 2. Now, this is kind of an interesting one. No incumbent here, so open seat. And Bill Rutherford and Rod Beck, that Democratic lead there, again, you kind of see a similar result to the other commission race. Margaret?
Yeah, we'll see how long that holds. I think that it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of the Democratic voters chose to vote early or do absentee, whereas Republicans were probably more likely to vote in person because of some of the, you know, maybe concerns about COVID-19. I saw a lot of conservative voters in Facebook comments, you know, saying, well, I'm just going to vote in person. So it would not surprise me if that lead disappears. Beck is a really strong candidate. He is a former Idaho state senator, has a long history. He was really instrumental in the Trump campaign here in Idaho. So in 2016, Bill Rutherford is a newcomer. He doesn't have as much of a name behind him. He ran once for the state house unsuccessfully, and we'll see what happens there. I think, you know, for Democratic viewers, I wouldn't get your hopes up looking at these early leads for the Democratic candidates.
Yeah, and it is interesting because the data in this seat. Hey, Justin, can you give us a mic check? We'll do this really quick while you're here. Oh, I've got to unmute you. Let's try that. Hey, Justin, I can hear you.
You can. Fantastic.
You know, it's always a technology challenge. I know some people may have been looking for Justin's work partner, Isabel Bilbao. She had another engagement, so she won't be joining us. We're hoping to have Meredith Stead, and we'll patch her in if she joins along. But it should be an interesting night. And Justin, thanks for joining me and Margaret, and thanks for figuring out the technology.
Absolutely, Don. Once you hit 40, a lot of this stuff really passes you by. I
Not
had a really.
I got that coming.
I had a really cool, expensive microphone. I'm like, well, that's not working, so let me just use the one that came with the 5-year-old laptop. So we're going with that.
Well, that's.
But
I'm glad we got it figured out. Let's look at some more results, shall we? Um,
thank you. That'd be great.
Let's hit over back to these Aydah County results, these early results. Here's the sheriff's race, and I don't know if this is a really surprise, Margaret or Justin, but the incumbent sheriff is still definitely well out ahead.
Still well out ahead, 55-45 there, Bartlett. And something that helps sheriffs really around the state. The state, certainly Aydah County, has pretty low crime rate, so it's tough to unseat an incumbent when things are going well. That probably goes for any position in government, any elected official. Zachary Wagner, the person running against Sheriff Bartlett there, pretty young, had some ideas, exciting ideas, but admittedly not even a ton of experience. So you can see he's really carrying sort of the more left-leaning side of Boise there right now, but not much else.
Yeah, interesting. So I think the other race that I'm really interested in, and Margaret's done some great reporting on this, is, those races for the Aydah County Highway District. And boy, those are going to be, I think, something we're going to watch throughout the night. And so these races, Margaret, as you've reported, are interesting because they only the people in that district vote. Is that right?
That's correct. So you're only voting for the person that represents your geographic area of the city. And I've seen a lot of confusion of some people who are really wanting to support certain candidates and then being disappointed when they're not on their ballot. And in this race is also unaffiliated, so there is no Republican or Democrat on the ballot. It's a voting name only, and I think that kind of adds another dimension where people who maybe aren't informed about this race are either likely to not vote or they will pick for arbitrary reasons. So it kind of changes the game for people that are not super in the weeds on the inside baseball of Aydah County politics.
Yeah, so this is the Jim Hansen Kara Veit race, and I did forums with all these folks with the neighborhoods a while ago, and interesting to hear their positions, but they were very similar in a lot of ways, more than I had kind of expected, and something I think you expect in these sort of municipal races. This is the race between incumbent Rebecca Arnold and newcomer Alexis Pickering. This is kind of a funny little slice of Meridian, and there's a little bit of Garden City in there, and some Boise, and Justin, I know that you've been looking at these races. What are you expecting to see tonight?
Well, I think that those results so far are a bit of a shocker. We've seen here and around the nation incumbents really carrying the day, and here we have Pickering, the newcomer, right now leading, though only slightly, over Rebecca Arnold, who has been around for 4 terms now, looking for a 5th. Pickering does have experience, former ACHD pedestrian advisory committee member. She's really hoping for that ACHD can fight for more leeway to invest in public transportation. Just reading again this great breakdown that Margaret wrote on BoiseDev.com. Arnold looking for continued fiscal responsibility, also more infrastructure as far as bicycles and pedestrians go. But what's interesting, I think for a lot of these ACHD races is, from what Margaret found out, a lot of it does have to do with public transportation. And Don, I think we all know, those of us who have been here a while and grown up here and seen the way the growth has gone the past 20 years, it's all been out. It's been sprawl. So public transportation was just a tough sell, considering people weren't centralized. People weren't living in centralized communities. They weren't working in centralized places. Margaret, though it seems, according to these race breakdowns, that now as downtown is building up a little bit more and we're seeing more apartments in a little farther out, like
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
Right. There's been a lot
Margaret,
more call and research for ACHD. Sorry?
nope, go ahead.
Um, there's been a call in recent years for ACHD to take a more active role in promoting and funding and sort of working with the city to create more public transportation. And there's been a growing network of activists that have really been watching the agency and trying to push them in this direction. And some of these candidates in this field, particularly Pickering and Emily Jackson Edney, over in the Meridian district, are hoping to win on that idea of needing more public transportation support. We'll see what happens. I think the Pickering Arnold race is going to be close, as you saw there in the results. Rebecca Arnold has a lot of name recognition. She ran for mayor in 2019. She's been around for 16 years, but she's also has some people that don't really like her very much, either from, some of her previous, maybe previous interactions they've had where they have expressed, I've seen people on social media express just saying they don't feel that she's open, or certain things that maybe, I know been involved in some lawsuits in Stanley years ago. So she's been around, and usually when people are around long enough, maybe sometimes there are enough folks who don't like them. But she also has a lot of supporters. She's a conservative. She has pushed for low property taxes. She has pushed for low impact fees, and kind of keeping that traditional ACHD should stick to the basics and build roads and stick to the simple stuff instead of trying to carve a new path.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to show too. Here's a map of those three districts that kind of show you the three that are up right now. So District 1 is Jim Hansen and Kara Veit. District 2, Rebecca Arnold and Alexis Pickering. And then District 5 is Dave McKinney and Miss Jackson Edney. And what's interesting is there's a couple of districts that are not voting. So if you were like in the North End, you didn't really get an ACHD seat to vote on. And same thing with District 4, which is throughout a lot of the southern part of the county. We're going to kind of start back here at the top now that we got Justin on, and let's talk about what we're going to watch tonight. So at the high level, we've got the race for U.S. Senator and the two races for the U.S. House, as well as the HJR4 ballot initiative, which we'll get into what exactly that is, because I think it's confusing sometimes. On the local side, we've got the legislative races, and there's a bunch. You can see them up there. I won't read them all. We've been talking about ACHD. And then we've also got these Aydah County races that we're looking at, the two commission seats, the prosecutor, the sheriffs, and then a Warm Springs water renewal bond, which didn't get a lot of interest, but it's the only actual bond election that's running in either county. So I think it's going to be an interesting evening as we kind of go along here. I'm going to flip over to the Secretary of State while we talk here, and you can see my screen is off this way, so if you look and see the side of my face, it's because I'm trying to get things up. Justin and Margaret, how did you guys vote? Did you vote early? Did you vote in person? What was kind of your experience?
Well, I'll go first. Yeah, I voted early, voted by mail. I always like to vote early when that was an option. When I used to live here, again, I've lived down in Missouri for about 3 years. They had absentee but not early voting, so you essentially just had to be out of the state. If you're, oh my gosh, it's Meredith Stead, everybody! Breaking news! Meredith joining us now. Finally.
I've got to unmute her. Meredith, can you hear us?
I heard her.
I really want something. I got to join with looks like poor internet. Okay, hopefully it's coming back.
There you go. We can hear you. I know you had a late night, Meredith, last night with planning and zoning, so we appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so let's look at the statewide races, because I think, these are some interesting things to see where these are going to go. Idaho's a pretty Republican state, but it's always kind of intriguing. And we've got early numbers, very early numbers from the Secretary of State right now. They are reporting 0%. So these are definitely early results, but quite a few votes counted there. for Paulette Jordan at 108,000 votes over Jim Risch, so currently leading there. In the U.S. Rep District 2, Russ Fulcher is the incumbent. He's got a pretty solid lead on Rudy Soto, who is the Democrat. Over in District 2 for the U.S. House of Representatives, again here, C. Aaron Swisher is leading Republican incumbent Mike Simpson. I think this can kind of give you an idea maybe where some of the vote is coming, probably the more urban and liberal areas of the state. So they're kind of interesting, and let's see if we can find HJR4, because that is something of interest. And Justin, I think you're the guy here. You really probably understand.
Oh, Lord.
Better than anyone I know. So tell us a little bit about how this works and what this is proposed to do.
All right. So first, as far as HJR4 goes, one of the main things I think we'll be watching tonight is just how many people actually voted on this thing. I think a lot of people, if they don't necessarily understand a bond, a levy, a measure, they're just going to not vote for it. Something different this year, obviously, a lot of people voting by mail, voting absentee, so they're filling out those ballots maybe on their kitchen counter. Maybe over a weekend they have time to do some research and figure this out. A lot of local newspapers, news stations have done stories on this as well. According to the Secretary of State's website right now, close to, as far as what they've voted so far, or counted so far, nearly 200,000 people have made their voice heard on this. And right now, the yes vote is way out in front. So people apparently seem to have understood what they were voting for here. Essentially, this does change the constitution of Idaho, Idaho's constitution, Idaho's state law. This would lock in the number of legislative districts in the state at 35, which is where it is now. It's where it's been for decades. What's going to happen is they're going to redraw the district lines as far as what districts encompass where, how big they are, how small they're going to need to be, and that redistricting commission will meet. And essentially, this HJR4 was just a safeguard to keep that number from getting any lower. Right now, state code does cap it at 35, but there's a possibility that it would get lower. So that would mean fewer representatives and senators in the Idaho State House, and those senators and representatives having to represent even more people than they already do. This thing had incredible bipartisan support. Well over 90% of both Senate and the House supporting it. Everybody liked it. The criticisms were, though, that it was a solution looking for a problem. Even Speaker of the House Scott Bedke said there was almost no chance of the redistricting commission dropping the number of legislative districts from 35. He didn't think it would happen. At the same time, to quote Dumb and Dumber, hey, you're saying there was a chance, and there was still a chance. He didn't want that to happen, so he figured, you know what? Let's just make sure. Let's just lock it in at 35. Another criticism was, well, we need more legislative districts because the population of this state is ever expanding. We need more of those districts. We need more representatives, more senators, and this doesn't address that problem. Again, he admitted that, but it also doesn't close the door on that. It would require another.
Changes the floor, essentially, right?
Yeah, it would require another ballot measure to increase the number of districts. But right now, this would lock it in at 35 so that the redistricting commission could not drop that. To make that point as conversationally as I can, essentially what it does is, it means that the same number of representatives and senators will still go to the state house, and they'll represent roughly the same amount, the same percentage of people of the state. So,
okay. There's your civics
long story
lesson on the apportionment of seats in the legislature. Meredith, I want to bring you into the conversation because we haven't had a chance to hear from you. What are you looking for tonight? What do you think we're going to see?
The House bill is definitely interesting. I think Justin did a great job of explaining it, because certainly it is complicated. And I would argue that, it may, I think similar to what you said, it may do us a favor, but it's also really vague and limiting. So we don't know if, we don't know that redistricting obviously plays a huge part. And as you said, it limits us. And, it's great that we can't then reduce districts, but we also can't make any progress in adding districts. So that'll be interesting to me. Certainly I have my eye on all the Aydah County races and the state races. I mean, it's going to be, we know that everything, even if the races aren't as close as maybe some of us would like to see, it's still really interesting to see, what kind of changes we've seen with the in-migration numbers that we've been experiencing over the last 4 years, and what kind of impact that will have on our elections. And, we see some purple areas that we didn't used to have. I'm interested in seeing, I guess, what the migration impact will be.
So I think that's interesting. So let's do that. Let's take a spin, so to speak. Somebody whose number I don't have in my phone says I'm not close enough to the mic. So whoever that was, thank you. And I'm not sure why it didn't show up with your name, but I appreciate it. So I'll move closer to the microphone. But let's look at these technology. Let's look at the races. So let's look at in Aydah County, District 14 for the Senate. C. Scott Grow has a strong lead right now over Ellen B. Spencer with 2/3 of the vote. This right now, with just one of 21 precincts, so we're still pretty early, but Mike Moyle, the incumbent there for House Seat 14A, is leading handily. In District 14B, you can see the Republican is leading the Democrat there. Over in Legislative District 15, I think this is going to be one to watch tonight. As Meredith kind of said, the makeup of the county is changing a little bit. District 15 is kind of right in the middle. And as of right now, Fred S. Martin has a very, very slight lead. What's the math there? Not very much on Rick Just. So we're going to be watching that, I think, throughout the night. In the House seats there. Go ahead.
I was going to say, something to keep in mind about that Martin Just race is that Fred Martin barely hung on in 2018. I believe he won that seat by less than 10 votes against current Boise City Planning and Zoning Commissioner Jim Bratnober. And while the other two Democratic seats in that district flipped blue. So that is a swing district that did not used to be swing. And I think there's a lot of people watching to see what will happen to Senator Fred Martin if he will earn another term.
It's interesting, Margaret, because I grew up here, and my parents grew up in District 17, which is just a little bit further to the east. And when I grew up, that was a very Republican district. And it's been interesting to see these things kind of march across the county. And, there's a lot of debate. Is Aydah County becoming more purple? I said I wouldn't say the T or the B word, but President Trump carried the county 4 years ago. So it will be interesting to see what happens there. We have seen some changes, but definitely going to be an interesting story that I think we're going to be watching throughout our time here. Let's look at the other seats in that district. We've got the race with...
Well, and
go ahead, Justin. Yep.
Yeah, real quick while you're going through that, I think it's one of only 2 districts of those, again, 35 districts that has a mix of Republicans and Democrats of those 3, the representatives and senators. So, yeah, it is one of the few battleground districts in the state, and it's very close. It's actually right on the line between Boise and Meridian. And as people talk about, well, is Aydah County very blue? Is it very red? It's probably both, depending on what city you're looking at. Boise seems to be growing increasingly blue. Meridian, more and more and more red. Really a stronghold. You talked about District 14. Certainly is that. It's the Star, Eagle, a bit of Meridian as well area. And Mike Moyle has no challenger there. As you go through there, certainly a Republican stronghold, and that's not looking to change. And being from Meridian, I know that it's grown exponentially over the past 2 or 3 decades. But again, the influx hasn't been necessarily Democrats or liberals from California. It's been conservatives from
Justin,
wherever they're coming from.
Did you have an 888 telephone number growing up?
887 all day long, Don. Yeah, for life. Yeah. So
it's funny. I'm actually up in McCall, and there is a little cafe here called 634. And people are like, "What is 634?" And it's like, it's the OG McCall prefix. Come on, you know. So let's look at some more races now that we're done talking about telephone numbers. District 16, Grant Burgoyne, handy lead there on the Senate side. District Rep 16A. Hey, John McCrosty. I think he's going to win. What do you think, guys?
It's too early to call, Don. Let's not make that mistake.
You know, it's funny. I almost made a graphic of all of the winners so that we could start the show with all of the unopposed races. Colin Nash and Jackie Davidson. Colin's got a pretty healthy lead there. Again, you're seeing this kind of Boise Meridian split. That has been interesting, and you know, I think a year ago, as Justin and I did coverage of this, and Margaret was at the Idaho Press, and you know, Meredith was running for office a year ago, and we'll get a chance to talk about that. It's interesting to look at those results because Lauren McLean took every single district in the entire city of Boise, and she had a strong liberal challenger. So it wasn't like, you know, hey, she was the only liberal and there was 5 conservatives. So, you know, I think you saw that, and that was really the first time I'd seen, even with Mayor Beater when he had strong challengers, you had some mixing. You know, Margaret, what have you been seeing with the kind of the change of the county here in the last year or so?
Right. I think that there are parts of the county outside of Boise that are getting redder, especially Eagle and Star and Meridian, that are attracting a lot of folks that are coming in who are, in their words, fleeing liberal areas, high tax areas, California, the suburbs of Portland and the suburbs of Seattle. And they aren't going to Boise. They're settling in the suburbs around the city. And I think those areas in these subdivisions, especially in Star, where it's a lot of subdivisions popping up with a lot of retirees who are cashing out of their, you know, their higher cost homes, are coming in. And so there's this idea that, oh, Californians are making Idaho more liberal, and that's just not the case. I honestly think that that migration is driven by people coming in because they want to live in a conservative state, and they are looking to cash in and kind of be in a state that has these low property taxes or lower taxes than where they're coming from in California and other parts of the country. So I would be really skeptical of anyone that makes the argument that Californians are flooding in and turning Idaho blue. That's just, it's just not happening.
Well, anecdotally, I'd even heard a family say that they moved here recently because their kids would be able to play sports here. And in their home state, you know, sports were being restricted right now because of the virus. And if they moved to Idaho, their kid would be able to continue in soccer. So that's why they made the move. So I think you're absolutely right, Margaret. We're not seeing people move here in spite of our red state. They're moving here because of it, I think, often.
So let's look at the county commission races. We'll get back to some of those, and we're going to look at Canyon County, of course, too. These commission races are interesting. Diana Locciondo, the Democrat, took this seat 2 years ago in an off-cycle election. Margaret, remind me who she faced 2 years ago.
I believe she ran against Sharon Ullman, if I'm correct. I can double check that here in a second. That was a race where there really was this move for people that wanted to elect people on the commission that were looking to upgrade some of these capital needs. During that election, I didn't cover it super closely, but I heard a lot of people saying, okay, we got a growing population. We need a new jail. We need a new, I've heard anecdotally they are stacking dead bodies in the coroner's office. They need a new coroner's office. and some of these other kind of desires to address some of the needs for the growth. And I think that the Democrat candidate Locciondo, who I'm thinking now, I believe she was running against Dave Case. I'm confused
You know what?
now.
Right. I think Sharon might have run in the primary. So yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. So she won that race, kind of, on an off cycle, and now she's on the same ballot as the presidential race. So it's going to be interesting to see if she can hold on, Margaret.
Yeah, I was just going to say. So I was wrong both times. Diana Locciondo ran against Jim Tibbs. My apologies. I just.
You know what?
I don't know.
It's okay.
My brain.
A lot of races out there.
Yeah.
Okay. But no, we'll see what happens with that. And I think that I remember the night of the election night 2018, Locciondo and Kendra Kenyon high-fiving and the crowd chanting, knock on doors, in the Grove Hotel. And I think that there was really this groundswell from the Democrats in that year. That was the same year there was kind of a mini blue wave. In Idaho, the Democrats took 2 seats in the House, several seats in the legislature. And there was this idea of, okay, it's an off year. Let's go get some of these municipal seats that might not have the national attention. But now Trump is on the ballot.
Yep.
COVID-19 restrictions are on the ballot. It's a very different situation.
So let's look at this. Here's the other race there. It's Bill Rutherford and Rod Beck. And boy, you can see that blue-red split we've been talking about there. Are still some blue districts kind of into Meridian and in the south part of the county, but you kind of are starting to see that. And there are some red districts in Boise still, for instance, especially on that western fringe. But it's still a tight race there for both of these two commission seats. And but Commissioner Locciondo's got a pretty healthy lead right now. We'll see how that goes over the night. The other race that's been, I think, kind of surprisingly interesting is this county prosecutor race, and this isn't one that's really often contested. Meredith, you're shaking your head. Have you been watching this race?
Yeah, I have a little bit. I mean, I think what I had heard is it's the first time there's been a Democrat on that ballot in like 40 years or something. Margaret, you can probably correct me.
I'm not sure of the exact year, but
start hearing Margaret typing and Googling that really quick.
Look, I got to cheat.
Right. That's not cheating. Google is not cheating, especially with everybody in online school now. I think it's just the way, right?
For sure.
This is true. But no, I don't have the exact year on this, but this is a race that the Democrats haven't put somebody up for this in a long time. And it's something that a lot of people kind of don't, it doesn't really get covered. And a lot of people just kind of don't, it doesn't have the same flash as the commissioner, and because they're not raising property taxes and kind of some of these other issues. But I think that Bennett's has made some high profile decisions in the last year and a half that have attracted a lot of attention. So I'm curious to see what the numbers will be.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, Ron Twilliger, kind of known in Boise County, and I think if you've been around Idaho politics for a long time, you recognize that name. His campaign at first was really interesting because you would just see signs, at least out in my neighborhood, that just said Twilliger. That's
very mysterious.
Yeah, and it was early in the cycle, and I was like, well, I kind of recognize that name, but like, what is that? And so I was like, that's actually maybe a good strategy, because I had to go Google what it was, and it's like, oh, there's a county prosecutor race this year. So that's kind of an interesting deal, and right now the incumbent Jen Bennett has a pretty healthy lead, but we'll see how that goes along throughout the night. Hey, Justin, should we do some Canyon County? Isabel's not here, but I feel like we need to represent the 2C.
Let's do that. And while you're bringing that up, I can tell you that I have confirmed through my own sources that it's just the third time in more than 40 years that the Democrats have run even a candidate for Aydah County prosecutors. So yeah, that's something that they just normally pretty much ignore.
Would you ask Jeeves by chance, or
it's web crawler. It's GeoCities website. Really going to take off here.
Well, and actually, when you first pulled that up, it was closer than I expected it to be. I think that was my reaction a little bit, but it looks like maybe even during this conversation, the lead has maybe widened a little bit. So
yeah. And it's interesting. You look at that race, Twilliger, someone who's been in Idaho politics around Boise for decades. Rod Beck, another person who's been in around politics around here, was Senate Majority Leader for a while. You know, they were both in that state house in the 70s, and here they are trying to win elections. So I think a lot just sort of Twilliger, especially trying to use their name recognition, and good for him. But right now, again, as Meredith talked about, he's trailing there.
Justin, do you have the Canyon County results up on your screen?
I was gonna scroll through their districts right now as far as legislatively.
Yeah,
do you want to talk about
go through the districts, and I'll follow you?
Lord,
see if the technology will work here.
It's kind of interesting because they sort of wrap around. But yes, let me go through. Oh boy, I'm right now not showing anything for legislative district 13. Or 12 or 11. Let me try to refresh this.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a little bit. So District 13, Jeff Agenbrod has a healthy lead. Yeah, okay, go ahead, Justin.
Thank you. That refresh button work. Yeah, Jeff Agenbrod, the incumbent, lead. Brent Crane, Ben Adams, a newcomer there, but it looks like, again, this is why we probably won't talk necessarily a ton about these legislative races. Really, these races are decided in the primary, most of them, except for in the very few battleground districts like District 15. But yeah, it looks like Agenbrod will hold on to his seat. Brent Crane will hold on to his seat. Ben Adams will win. Rick Youngblood ran unopposed. Bruce Skog looks like he's on his way. Todd Lakey on his way to retaining there. Moving toward Caldwell. Patty Ann Lodge back again. Now looks like she's going to serve more than, well, she was running unopposed. So we knew now more than 20 years there in the state house. She's going to add to that. Scott Syme, Tammy Nichols, strong lead, strong support. They're enjoying there. Going to District 10, moving out a little farther. Jim Rice and Greg Shaney both going to hold on to their seats, and Julie Yamamoto winning her race. Then out just a bit farther, Abby Lee and Ryan Kirby both ran unopposed. Judy Boyle winning there. So, as we expected, I was talking to some folks around the area who've been in and around politics for a while. I asked if they thought there would be any surprises as far as legislative races went, and they said no.
Yeah,
and here we're seeing exactly
that. County a lot tonight, right?
No, and hey, if you ask those incumbents and those conservatives, those Republicans who are almost assuredly going to win those races, they would say it's a mandate from the people, and it seems to be. But conversely, if you look at districts in the Boise area, those are skewed the exactly opposite end of the spectrum on the Democratic side. And this is what we're talking about as far as Aydah County goes. As blue as Boise is, Meridian is just as red, and then Canyon County just as red as Meridian. Another county that's been growing, but again, they have not really been getting more liberal either. They've been getting just as conservative or even more so. It's interesting, though, that as people come here to sort of chase those lower property taxes, that it seems like as they continue to move in here and build here and the demand goes up and up, those property taxes go up and up. I guess, Margaret, in your conversations with the people specifically in Aydah County, what were some of their ideas on trying to battle that? Is there anything they can do? I mean, it would seem a lot of people say if property values go up, if the demand goes up, then those property taxes are going to go up.
Right. And what's going on with Idaho property taxes, especially in Aydah County, is that there's a major shift in the value of residential property. So commercial property is just not growing in value as fast as residential property. And that means that even if, you know, your city or your county doesn't vote to increase property taxes, your assessment is still going to go up. Your taxes are still going to go up. And so, you know, the counties and the cities are in a position where they can cut taxes. They can keep those tax rates down. And there is a lot of pressure to do that, especially, you know, for Republican candidates. A lot of tax, you know, rates were not increased due to COVID-19. But the increases are still there, and it's because of that increase. The increase for residential property, the demand is so much higher than commercial. And what it's doing is that a lot of the issues of, in order to relieve that burden, you can only cut so much at the county level, you know, before you get to the root of the issue, which is just those values increasing. And there have been discussions at the legislature to kind of change the property tax system, make it more, just make it less susceptible to increasing in those really high numbers that we've seen in recent years. But so far, there hasn't been any traction on that. There were several proposals in the last legislative session. None of them passed. And I don't know what's coming in this session. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, it sounds like, I think the push was to try to make the tax base a little less burdensome on the homeowners. And Margaret's 100% right that didn't gain any traction. But it's interesting that we started the county commissioner discussion saying the voters clearly wanted, new and increased infrastructure because of our growing population. But then as soon as, we can't do that obviously without funding. And so it's hard to build another coroner's office or another jail or anything like that unless the money's coming from somewhere. So I can see that it's a challenge for those commissioners. I have heard Diana Locciondo say that, quote, exactly that, bodies were stacking up in the morgue and they were desperate to do that. So I can imagine it must be a big challenge to figure out, how to please the voters, but also get the job done.
And one thing I do want to say to clarify some of my earlier comments is I think that desire for more infrastructure and to kind of do some of this proactive spending to address growth really drove turnout in 2018. I'm not sure what that will drive here in 2020. That we're in a different environment. Trump is on the ballot. We have a lot of people fired up about the COVID-19 restriction issue. And I think that the electorate just looks different in a presidential year versus a 2018 year. And I've heard a lot of skepticism from people. I heard it in 2018. I continue to hear it this year of folks saying, well, we don't need these new facilities. People have said the coroner's facility doesn't need to be expanded, or some folks arguing that the jail doesn't need to be expanded, or improvements to the courthouse to add more courtroom space aren't really necessary. So there is still that debate, and I think that it's going to be interesting to see what people are hoping for. But I think the takeaway I would like to say is that I think if you do a man on the street issue, you poll Idahoans anywhere, the number one issue they're going to talk about, especially in Ada County, is property taxes. And that has been an issue that has really there's been really not much movement on it. And that is something people are crying out for relief. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and Meredith, I think, you talk about that man on the street. You were out campaigning last year. What were voters telling you that was their number one issue? Obviously, it was just Boise and just sort of one piece, but what were you hearing from people when you were out knocking doors and doing those pre-pandemic activities?
Yeah, right, that we used to do, talk to people in real life. Right. I think that definitely property taxes, rent is a huge one. I've heard recently that probably from one of your reports, Margaret, that rents increased about 10% just since the spring. COVID hit, which is crazy. And certainly that's what I heard. And I think with property taxes, something that I talked about a lot was, wouldn't it be great if we were building in a way that was a little bit more sustainable, so that we saw development happening where the infrastructure could support it already. And in Boise, certainly that is downtown and close to downtown. And that's trying to reduce developments like Avamore or Dry Creek, where they have to run brand new infrastructure all the way out to support one set of houses. Obviously, that infrastructure is really important, and we'd like to think that it's passed back to developers or whatever the case might be, but it's not really, and that distribution is probably not where homeowners or renters would like to see it. But so that, certainly property taxes and rentals, I think, is the big one. And even in Boise, it's like Airbnbs and, those kinds of restrictions too, when you start getting into some of the denser neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Are we looking at a new race? Oh, we're checking back in.
What's that?
Checking back in with the commissioner race?
Yeah, it's starting to tighten up. Let's look at I have to zoom out here to look at so this is with 60 of the 151 precincts reporting. And what's interesting is the turnout right now is over 70%. This includes a mix of election day and then all the absentee and the early vote. So still some election day out, it looks like. Commissioner Locciondo still has a fairly strong lead here. It has kind of gone down a bit since we last looked at it. In the other race, ooh, look at that. Bill Rutherford and Rod Beck running neck and neck. And I think this speaks a little bit to what Margaret said earlier about looking for some tightening there. And I think we're definitely seeing that. Let's look at that prosecutor race again. And, I think the incumbent prosecutor's got a pretty strong lead. But, some interesting results. You know what else we should look at? Let's look at District 15. We've been talking about this. Can I search? Nope. Well, that didn't work well. I used to have a whole TV station and a bunch of team people to do all these things.
Well, Don,
Justin and I both.
While you're looking for that, it's interesting.
Save me.
Interesting doing my research on BoiseDev.com, talking about the growth vote. This was the platform, at least the platform that certainly Rutherford and Beck both build their campaigns around what to do with growth. Rutherford said he wanted to slow it down, as Meredith suggested, maybe have developers pay more of their fair share. Beck just wants to outright cut property taxes, cut the budget overall, which obviously a lot of people liked. So it's sort of a similar goal for both those guys. It's the same problem that people in Aydah County have had for the past 20, maybe 30 years is this growth in infrastructure that just can't keep up. And despite rising property taxes and a rising tax burden, slightly different solutions, I guess. Is there, Margaret or Meredith, as you both were talking to voters, is there just some sort of exasperation eventually from voters that it's like, well, this is just, it's never going to get fixed, because as high as people think the property taxes are here, they're nowhere close to obviously much larger towns or cities.
I would say that voters do not think that way, especially, you could say that about every issue anybody might have. Traffic, like our traffic is really not that bad. You go to any other city, our average commute time has raised from like 18 minutes to 22. It's still looking pretty good, instead of hours in another metro. And I don't think voters think, oh, we have it pretty good here. What they think is, it was better last year. And I want to go back to that. And how can we fix this? And it must be easy, right?
I tell people, because I spent about 10 months in California in 2017 and 2018 in the Bay Area, and they have traffic. We don't. But it's that relative thing, right? You're like, oh, well, I remember when I could get to Meridian from Southeast Boise in 12 minutes, and you can't really do that anymore.
Yeah. Well, and the solution is to all that traffic is to not keep widening the roads, because eventually you're just going to run out of real estate, as pretty much they have. It's to build that public transportation and that infrastructure. And then it's like, oh, great, but you got to pay for it. And they're like, no, thank you. It's like, okay, enjoy your commute time.
It's an interesting balance, right? Like all the work that's gone into Chinden Boulevard, especially it goes through Meridian, where it's a 2-lane road, which it's a major arterial, and it was 2 lanes, and that's a place where you go, yeah, they probably needed maybe 2 in each direction at least. But in the urban center of Boise, you're right. There's just not the room to widen the road. So how do we fix that? And I think, there's a lot of attention on that at the city. And I say that meaning Boise, but really the city of Meridian's got a lot of focus on that too. And you're starting to see that in Garden City, and more of these cities are trying to figure out, how do we solve these problems?
Well, it's tricky. I mean, when we're seeing subdivisions with 2,500 houses approved or on the way to approval in some of the towns on the outskirts of the metro in Star, certainly that's not going to solve the transportation issue, especially without something like, an effective public transportation system in the works.
So let's look at some more results here, and I did want to look at the kind of the top line race, the presidential race for Aydah County, and even though the state of Idaho will most certainly go for President Trump, it's interesting to see this. You do see a fairly tight race. We've got a ways to go here, where it's a little over half of the precincts, or a little less, I should say, than half the precincts reporting. But it's interesting. You have Joe Biden out with a lead there. President Trump carried Aydah County with, I believe, 60% 4 years ago. This really doesn't do anything more than serve as a little bit of a barometer for the county, and allows us to see like what really is changing each 4 years. I think we should look at those District 15 races again, and we get a tight one there. Fred Martin and Rick Just, they're in a dogfight in that sort of purpley district of District 15.
So close. What happened to? I feel like we heard so many news articles leading up to this day saying patience is going to be the most important thing. We're not going to get any results the night of. Everybody just hang tight. But I feel like, maybe our county's on top of it, but it seems like even nationwide, we're seeing results as quickly as we did in 2016.
Well, Justin, you remember the old days in Aydah County when we were in the newsroom. It always seemed like Aydah County was like the slowest county to count. But in recent years, it seems like, I don't know if it's Phil McGrain or what it is, but it seems like there's been some strides made there.
Yeah, they seem to have really focused on the process. Something they tried to get past in this special session was allowing them to count those early and absentee ballots a few days early. Didn't pass. So they just started, I'm sure, counting this morning, and went to work, and he's got a good crew there apparently. And yeah, that was sometimes fun, not knowing exactly going through a process. It was a journey. It was a story arc, Don, through the night, seeing what might happen. But yeah, they are, I mean, hey, it's 2020, so we should be able to count these ballots a little quicker every time around. It's good to see.
Pull up their webcams, but it's like, let's see if we can go back to this here.
It looks like they were done. I don't know. Was that just me? It looks like they were just putting the pencils away.
This is the tabulation room, and I don't see any tabulating. So,
guys, you're on BoiseDev.com. Look busy. Look busy.
Oh yeah, it reminds me of a time I've told this story before. I was doing some calls on a story a couple of years ago. It was like maybe a year and a half ago, and I was calling around, and the first person I got was like, "Hi, it's Don with BoiseDev." Boise what? Oh, BoiseDev. And then I do the second one, and hey, it's Don with BoiseDev. What is that? Who's Deb? And I'm like, yeah, BoiseDev. That's great. That's good for my ego. And then the third call I got, it was at the county. It was actually the county clerk's office. And I was like, hey, it's Don with BoiseDev. She's like, oh my gosh, I love your site. I'm on it right now. And it's good because it really healed my BoiseDev ego that day. So I don't know that anybody at the Ada County tabulation room is paying attention to us right now, but if they are, you're
that's funny. I get that. I worked at Ballet Idaho for a long time, and everybody thought it was a valet company. They're like, I'm so glad Boise has a valet company now for all the good parties we have. I was like,
yeah, good times.
Quite. Well, and Don, real quick, interesting point about District 15 there. People might be thinking, well, I don't live there. It doesn't really affect me. But Fred Martin is chairman of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, and a lot of important bills go through there that affect everyone in the state. So if he can't hold on to that, that's going to change the leadership of that committee, and it's probably going to change what sort of legislation does or does not make it through there. So that's certainly why everybody should be interested in that, besides the fact that it's just a close race and, again, one of the few battleground districts in the state.
I think that context is really helpful. And when you look at this on a precinct level, that east-west thing, it's pretty interesting. The further west you go, the more the Republican vote is. The further east you go, the more the Democrats are. And it's just, it's not perfect here, but you can really see that that's kind of the pattern that follows, and it is close.
Yeah.
It is close.
Have we looked at any of the state races yet?
We have. It's been a while. You know what? I had it pulled up to look at about, I don't know, half an hour ago, and the conversation took us past that. So let's do that. Let's look at some of those statewide races. I made fancy animations.
Oh, so fancy.
I had to use them, right? So we'll start at the top of the ticket here. The last time we looked at this, or maybe the first time, you had Democrat Paulette Jordan in her second statewide race out ahead, but that has certainly slipped by a lot. The incumbent Jim Risch is now on top with a fairly comfortable margin. The U.S. House District 1, Russ Fulcher, the incumbent there, notably didn't debate on KTVB. They invited him and he said no, but he's winning pretty handily. Mike Simpson, who did debate, is in a little bit of a closer race there. And, pro-life, who is a person formerly known as Marvin Richardson, has been on the ballot as long as I can remember. Gosh, Justin, 15 years, a long time. And he always gets a few votes. So sometimes the exercise is worth it, right?
He's always been the person formerly known as, even for 15 years? Or was he at one point just that person?
So, and Justin, fill me in if we can remember this story, but he started out as Marvin Richardson and tried to change his name to Pro-Life and did it like informally, and the state's like, well, no, we're going to put your real name on there. And so he went about the process of legally changing his name to Pro-Life. And then the state said, okay, but we're going to put a person formerly known as Marvin Richardson so that people aren't confused. And just vote, I'm going to vote Pro-Life.
You just can't shake it.
We have some interesting things there. We have the Harley Browns of the world. We have Pro-Life. We always have some interesting characters that run for office.
Yeah, Richardson is really, I think, the Prince of Idaho, in that he could never really shake.
I thought you meant in like the Prince Charles sense for a second. I was like, I don't get that, but I get.
No, I paused to try to let it hit. Yeah, and then also, I think interesting, Don. I hate to paint myself as the expert on this thing, HJR4, but it has overwhelming support right now. It's well on its way to passing right now. A super majority. It's the very bottom of the page there of the statewide, 66 to 33%. It does not need a super majority, I don't believe, but it looks like it's going to get it anyway. Certainly, I talked probably too long at the outset of our broadcast about that. Does that surprise anyone else that?
I am surprised at that. I mean, one of the things that you had said when we logged on as our practice session, which obviously I failed because I had trouble logging on tonight. But one of the things you said is that you were finding that people weren't understanding it and were having a hard time really fully understanding the I don't want to say repercussions, but the impact of it, I guess. And so I'm super surprised that if we can say that a lot of people didn't understand it, that still a lot of people would vote for it.
Yeah.
Well,
and maybe that's on me. Maybe I didn't give people enough credit. Maybe they did understand it, or again, they had time voting from home, voting absentee, where they could research it a little bit. And it's like, oh, I'll click on this story, figure out what it means. And like, okay, that doesn't hurt. It has incredible support. Whatever, I'll vote for it. I'm sorry, Don, I cut you off.
No, you're okay. Justin and I had a long conversation about this 3 weeks ago, a month ago, and I was dubious. I thought, people will vote no if they don't understand it, and that's either not the case, or and I'll be interested to see this. So there's a total of 320,000 votes in that race, and I was going to look at the presidential race to see if there's an undervote there, and there really isn't. A little bit. So there, I think people sort of get it and said, hey, well, sounds good to me. You get Democrats and Republicans like something. That's compromise, right?
One of the things that threw me was, out of the state leaders that I respect and have my eye on, they were split on it. And that to me is kind of a red flag, if why change I think one of the things, Justin, you had said is, people might argue, why change the Constitution unless it, really has to be done and is very clear on what we're doing. And so if the people that I most respect are split on that makes me pretty hesitant to then move forward with something as impactful as a Constitution change.
Okay, should we look at those Aydah County Commission races again? What do you guys think?
Let's go for it.
I put the graphic up, so you don't have a choice. So Commissioner Locciondo holding on to a fairly slight lead here. What are we looking at? About 3.5 points there. So pretty tight. And then in the other commission race, Rod Beck, was he on top last time? I don't recall.
I think Rutherford was ahead before, but it was very, very small margins.
Yeah, and so they're kind of teeter-tottering back and forth. Margaret, as you talk to people about these races, did you sense any trepidation? Did people think it was going to be close?
The sense that I got was that there was a feeling that the Republicans would probably take the commission, or at least, hold the same majority that the same power that they had now. The Locciondo and Davidson race is interesting because, Ryan Davidson has some folks in the Republican Party who are not really his biggest fan. And I think a lot of that comes down to he is pretty far right, more of a libertarian kind of influence in some of his politics. I know Tommy Alquist, who ran for governor in 2018, to the right of Little, criticized him in an interview I had and said he didn't run the Aydah County Republican Committee well whenever he was in charge. So that race kind of has another dimension, because there might be people who would vote for Trump who might look at Davidson and say, okay, I'm a Republican, I'm in the party, and I don't really get along with this guy. But I think Beck didn't have those same concerns, especially running against Rutherford, who doesn't have the name recognition that maybe another Democrat might have. He's a newcomer. So I always kind of got the impression that Beck was, people were expecting Beck to win, and the Locciondo race was going to be more of a toss-up because people didn't know what the influence was going to be. Something else to note, there has been some really big money in this Aydah County race. Home builders have spent quite a lot in attack ads against Locciondo that ended up being taken down because she was subject to some threats. And, there were other direct contributions to some candidates by these home builders. And so I think there was a lot of kind of more of a mystery around the Locciondo-Davidson race of how much that big money would influence, how much, and some of the personality issues going on maybe with the Republican candidate.
Okay, we're going to take a very quick break of less than a minute, and then we're going to come back out and we're going to look at those ACHD races. We haven't talked about that in a while. You are watching The Growth Vote.
You are watching a BoiseDev live presentation. The Growth Vote 2020. Featuring our expert panel, Margaret Carmel, Meredith Stead, and Justin Core. Presented by Holland & Hart. Holland & Hart is a full-service AmLaw 200 firm delivering integrated legal solutions to local, regional, national, and international clients of all sizes. Their Boise office has deep roots in Idaho, with sophisticated experience to handle the most complex issues. The Growth Vote 2020.
Oh, I gotta unmute. See, I did this before when I did my Future Downtown event. I have to push like 5 buttons to unmute, and so I did this before.
There we go.
Welcome back. Hour 2.
Welcome back.
Yeah. We've got a great panel, Margaret Carmel with BoiseDev, Justin Core with Bilbao & Co. And Meredith Stead, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and your professional affiliations because you've got a few.
Well, only one that pays me. That's Boise Valley Economic Partnership, but I also sit on the City of Boise Planning and Zoning Commission.
And had a late night last night with a project. So I promised everybody that we would look at the Aydah County Highway District races because it's been a little bit, and I try to be a person of my word. So let's do that right now. Jim Hansen and Kara Veit. This is the ACHD district that covers kind of the southeast portion of Boise and the county. And Jim Hansen is the incumbent there. Had what I would call a fairly strong challenge from Kara Veit. Had some money behind her, and is a former ACHD employee. Is that right, Margaret?
Yes, she used to do community outreach on construction projects for ACHD for about a year. And then she did some other kind of transportation related public relations since then. Veit's positions didn't really differ too much from Jim Hansen, although she did kind of have a little bit more skepticism around whether Boise's public transportation was ready to have some heavy investment. I remember her saying multiple times, in order for a public transit system to work, you have to have faith in it that it's going to show up frequently and on time. And, she was saying we weren't really there. And whereas Jim Hansen is very much his number one priority in anything he does is really, how do we support public transit? How do we support bike and pedestrian infrastructure? He's a little bit more multimodal focused, and he's known as he's the public transit guy. And so Veit's, but other than that, Veit's didn't really differ from him hugely, but that's kind of to be expected in some of these more really niche municipal races.
Yeah, and I think Boise Mayor Lauren McLean was out campaigning for him. Am I right in that? I think I saw that.
Yeah, so Hansen is the only candidate on the ballot who received an endorsement from McLean. I don't know if she was, to the extent of her active campaigning for him, but I know she sent letters in support. She donated some money to his campaign. There has been a lot of kind of negative press in certain ways of people trying to connect Diana Locciondo with Lauren McLean and saying that they're both really radical Democrats, that they are in the same kind of camp. But it's interesting because they are both Democrats, they are both women, but McLean did not donate to Commissioner Locciondo or endorse her and has kind of stayed out of that race.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say
they shared a campaign manager. Let's look at the other ACHD race before we get too far off here. Alexis Pickering and Rebecca Arnold. Rebecca, yeah, I think the oh my gosh there for Meredith summed it up. Right? This is a tight race. We are less than 300 votes.
And, the public transportation thing was a part of this campaign as well. I think Rebecca Arnold has, said time and time again in her tenure that ACHD is not meant to be involved in public transit, that their job is to build roads. And I know that Alexis Pickering has said that, you know, we should be investigating the public transit options and investments with AC and bike lanes and all that kind of stuff. So I think she's along those same the same policy ideas as Jim Hansen. So it's very interesting to see.
Yeah, it's closer than I.
So tight, you can just really know exactly divided we are even on this local level.
Well, and something else to keep in mind about is that some of the folks that I have seen that are to her do not live in her district. There's a lot of people that are in that, you know, Boise, North End, kind of central Boise area that are saying, man, I really want more public transit. I wish there were more people on ACHD that kind of espouse that point of view. I wish I could vote for Pickering. I feel like I've seen that comment on social media so many times. But really, this ACHD race, it's one of those district races. You can vote for the person who represents your area and no one else. And so we'll see what happens. I think that this is going to be the big surprise tonight, depending on what happens. I'm curious to see what's going on with the Jackson Edney and McKinney race.
It's funny you ask, because here it is. I said
a
little too much emphasis in my voice. You know, that is interesting. I will say, you know, I moderated those neighborhood forums with all three of these, and this was the race I had the least feel for on how it might go.
I am actually surprised to see this result. I think McKinney ran a very low key campaign. He did outspend Jackson Edney by, if I remember correctly, but Jackson Edney outraised him, I believe. And also, you know, she was much more visible on social media. I saw a lot more people, you know, posting positive comments. You know, something I think about when I was trying to do my election series on candidates, you know, it was very hard to get a hold of Dave McKinney. I was honestly wondering if we would do an interview. And usually, in my experience, a candidate that is really kind of off the radar, I don't see too many social media posts, they're really hard to set up an interview with, not really seeing signs. That's usually something that I kind of say, all right, well, I don't write them off, but I kind of just assume, okay, if this person they're not really out there, so thus I don't expect them to do well. And especially in this non-affiliated race where he doesn't even have a Democrat or a Republican, to see him overtaking her in that way, it really makes me wonder what's been going on.
It's really interesting that, you know, to think of candidates, to me, it almost seems like campaigning, it should be a rite of passage for candidates before they get in office. Like, show us how hard you can work. Let's see that momentum keep up when you're in office. And to think of candidates sort of just, you know, getting through the campaign with a huge margin nonetheless, and then taking office kind of kills me on the inside.
And Justin, I think
and McKinney did, I believe, previously run for Meridian City Council. So he is not a complete unknown, but it was not a name I had heard before. You know, it wasn't, and I'm curious if you guys were familiar with him before this race. I don't think he was someone that a lot of people were kind of like Rod Beck, you know, where a lot of people were kind of like, oh, I know that dude. And I really, sorry, what, Don? You're
Fine.
Once again too far from the mic.
Too far from the mic.
Keep far from the mic. Yeah, no, I think that, and it just is interesting to see what happened with those numbers. I think there's going to be a lot of people surprised. I consistently saw positive social media, you know, comments, you know, after debates of people saying, "Oh, Jackson Edney, great job." And so I think that that is the first time tonight I think I've been surprised.
Okay, Justin, you had something to add here?
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting that, Margaret, you talked about this, and Meredith as well, that you can only vote for certain ACHD candidates if you're in their district, even though their decisions affect all of Aydah County. And so you see someone like a McKinney, who ran a pretty anti-public transit campaign, for the campaign that he did run. And that isn't going to fly in, North Boise, sort of more that area. But for where he is, it seemed to really resonate with those folks. And then you have, go ahead.
Yeah, it's going to make for an interesting makeup to that commission if Miss Pickering wins, which is still, I think, a big if, and this gentleman wins. It's going to change that. It's going to cause, I think, some more angst on that commission than we've even had before. And there's been quite a bit of friction, I would say, on ACHD over the years.
Yeah, it's been a really there's a lot more kind of fighting there and disagreement than a lot of people know of, because it's such a niche. I keep saying that word, but it really is a very specific government agency that does a very specific job. And I think every reporter who's ever attended, or every citizen who's ever attended an ACHD meeting, can tell you your eyeballs will glaze over. They are really doing some intense stuff in that agency, but there's a really strong, divide between people that are looking for, let's go after that public transit, those alternative modes of transit, and other folks that are really dedicated to, let's widen as many roads as we can, as wide as we can. And I think that, and kind of this, maybe idea that there's a lot of optimism in Boise that the Treasure Valley can change into a community where people are taking public transit and they're not going everywhere in their car. But then in places like Meridian and Western Boise, where it's just kind of a sea of subdivisions, and it's not a bad thing, that's just what it is, that there really isn't that optimism. Mm-hmm. Folks are saying, I live in a subdivision with half-acre lots. I'm not walking to a bus stop. Why should my money be going towards public transit infrastructure in the inner core? And then people who live in Boise are arguing, well, okay, if more people in the denser part of the city take transit instead of drive, it will make the traffic better for people who live in Meridian to commute in. But there's a lot of arguments about that, and it's something that is going to become more of a topic in the next couple of years as our population grows and as our air quality gets worse.
Okay, Margaret.
Well, and I was talking to
on the mic. Pull your screen back a little bit so we can see you. And Justin, go ahead. There we go.
I was talking to someone who was from Seattle, owned some property up there, and talked about how if you're going to have a significant investment in public transportation, it's almost always going to come with a vote from the people, and people aren't going to vote for something like that until it's already a significant problem. And by the time it's a significant problem and they vote for it, you're 10 years too late to start building it. So hopefully that's not the situation we're in, but Margaret's absolutely right. It was about 10 years ago. I lived in Meridian and looked into the possibility of taking like a commuter ride, and it was just wildly impractical. I'm like, well, I got to drive 10 minutes to where I need to park to catch the van, which will take me to a spot that's still 10 minutes away from my work. So it's like, man, I'm just going to drive. Also, we're
going to come back to this, but look, I think we need to look at the Aydah County Commission race, because
cool.
There is definitely some movement here, and you can see it. The race between Diana Locciondo, the Democratic incumbent, and Ryan Davidson, the Republican challenger, is close.
Wow.
And we are...
it's crazy that office, she's, to be in office for a year and then essentially start campaigning again with such high stakes, knowing that it's going to be a tight race because of the nature of her business. It's really tricky, these 2-year terms, I think, to make a lot of traction before you are back on the ballot again and raising money and campaigning.
Well, and what a year too, as she's been the representative on the public health board for Aydah County, and that's been a very high profile thing to do this year. Usually public health board meetings are not something that anybody watches. And in fact, they were having some open meeting violations earlier in the year because I don't think they were used to anybody caring. They care now, and they live tweeted, and people pay attention. And Commissioner Locciondo has come out pretty strongly in favor of masks, and there are some people who don't agree with that. And is that a part of this result? I don't know. It's interesting. And what's fascinating, I want to show one thing actually. I don't want to monopolize too much, but the county commission seats are really interesting because people vote county-wide, but the commissioner represents an individual district. So Commissioner Locciondo lives in District 1, which you can see here on the screen, and she ostensibly represents that district, but everybody in the county votes. So it's not like ACHD where it's just the people in that district. It's everybody citywide. So kind of an interesting dynamic there, and I think you're seeing it play out in the results. In a countywide race, it's a tough one for her.
Well, does it surprise anybody else that in Aydah County, a lot of the incumbents are just in brawls right now, as far as Locciondo goes, and Arnold, who's going for her 5th term now. Back in Rutherford, that one's still close, but also Hanson, I think the last time we checked, that was a close race here. It seems like, at least in the legislative races, and it looks like Hanson has a somewhat comfortable lead, but still you have other incumbents again like Locciondo and Arnold, a longtime incumbent, that are just in real trouble, while in legislative districts the incumbents are just cruising.
It's public office is not. It's a tough place right now because I think people are frustrated across the board. I mean, you could take any issue right now, and we're people are divided on it. We should be wearing masks. We should not be wearing masks. We have COVID under control. They wish COVID was under control. And so I think people are voting on those really strong opinions, and that's why we're seeing everything so divided. We have some really major issues. I mean, even the justice issue, or some of the human rights issues we're seeing. People either think it's an issue and equally think it's not an issue. And so it's not a huge surprise, I guess, to see people are voting that way too. Either you are frustrated with the way things are going now, or you want it to go this way harder, right?
Well,
so I think we are seeing those votes reflect that.
You look at the pandemic, it happened at the very tail end of the legislative session. The session was probably sped up a little bit because of the pandemic. And those people have been not a factor in the public conversation, but Diana Locciondo has. The county commission has been at the center of this. Obviously, Boise Mayor Lauren McLean and council member Lisa Sanchez faced a recall effort that didn't really go anywhere. Governor Little also faced a recall effort that didn't go anywhere. And so it's been this interesting thing where the legislative seats haven't had a say, haven't really weighed in, other than maybe sort of extracurricularly, as I think we've seen. But the legislative session's coming up. The pandemic won't be over. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like. But by virtue of timing, those seats aren't up for a while, so it's going to be interesting. Everybody all at once. Okay, so let's go and look at the statewide races. It's been quite a while since we have done that. Let me make sure.
All I could think was, I know what the legislative session is going to look like, and there won't be very many masks.
Yeah, right.
I
that's a good point.
Something else to keep in mind. I mean, I think that the COVID issue, the mask issue, was one of the number one things that I heard a difference on those commissioner candidates in the debate that they had. Property taxes, everybody across the board was concerned about property taxes and, expressed support for change. But the thing that you saw people go one way or the other on was whether there were, a need for restrictions or not. I remember Rod Beck praising the governor of South Dakota, which has just, I mean, that state never really shut down and has had, I think, some of the lowest restrictions in the country. So you had him on one side, and then Rutherford, who was much more, saying, hey, let's do masks, let's do some of these restrictions to try and slow the virus. Obviously, Locciondo has strong support for masks, has voted for some restrictions, but something that really I think a lot of people are kind of forgetting in this race is that Locciondo is one person on that Central District Health Board. I think that even if she were to get voted out, which she very well could, judging by how close this race is, there would still be lots of other folks on that board that are going to be voting in support of restrictions. So I think there's been a lot of rhetoric of let's get rid of, Diane Locciondo and then we will have no masks anymore. And that's just not the way Central District Health is probably going to go.
I think that's true about the property taxes as well. If you get rid of Diana Locciondo, it doesn't mean that we're not going to see any increase in property taxes. The issue is more complicated than, same with the mask issue. These are more complicated issues than one person has responsibility for.
They are, and property taxes in Idaho are incredibly complicated. We've actually got a piece at BoiseDev that we're waiting to run for the right time. They're super complicated, but Commissioner Locciondo and Commissioner Kenyon did vote to take foregone property taxes, and not a super popular decision with some people because it meant that their property tax bill went up because they paid for some essentially back taxes without getting into the weeds of what foregone taxes are. And so, she's made some decisions, and now she's up on the ballot, and you can see those results. And whether she keeps the seat or not, I think it's still far too early. The number of precincts here, we are at 90 of 151, so a ways to go. And I was trying to look here at the presidential result for the county to get an idea of maybe where some of this vote is outstanding. And it looks like we still have some more conservative parts of the county for vote totals to come in if the results from 4 years ago hold, where President Trump got 60% of the vote. So we'll see. That I would say that's a pretty layman's analysis there, but it'll be interesting to see where we go here in the next little bit. What else should we look at, folks?
Well, you guys were talking about the mask issue and COVID, and that's going to obviously be at the center of a lot of stuff happening in the legislature. A quick note again, if you didn't tune in before, in District 15, Senator Fred Martin over there, chairman of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, the chairman of the House Health and Welfare Committee, running unopposed, Fred Wood. He's, I believe, the only or one of the only actual doctors in the state house. So that leadership could stay the same on that issue. You talked about people serving on Central District Health Board. Majority Caucus Chair Megan Blanksma running for office tonight in District 23. That obviously, if she loses that, even though she's expected to win pretty handily, wouldn't take her off that board, but it might be a commentary on what she's done, but she feels like she's representing her people's voice there on that board. And again, I'm not seeing any results yet out of District 23, which is where she is. But yeah, I think that was a good question. What does next session look like? I think it's going to depend on what the next couple months looks like in this country and in this state. And if I could tell you what that would look like, I would have had a much less anxiety over the entire rest of this year, but I just don't. So,
so looking at those 3 District 15 races, it's interesting because I'll take this full so Justin doesn't have to be on screen this whole time. But this Senate race, Fred Martin has opened a little bit more of a lead. Again, we've got some time there. So the Republican leading there, but in the House, in seat A, Steve Birch, who is the incumbent, correct?
Yes.
I wish these were labeled. So he's got a lead there of about 6%, and then on seat B, Cody Galloway, the Republican, is beating Jake Ellis. So purple. This is it's a purple district.
Really? Wow, that's surprising. Yeah, Ellis obviously the incumbent there. So that's again why it's one of the few battleground districts in the state. You sort of have kind of half Meridian-ish, half Boise-ish, and just different political views there. So the Republicans would really be celebrating if they could flip one of those House seats.
You know, it's interesting because it's like you think, well, what is it that makes people split? So, you know, on seat A, and it's all the same voters, right? It's the same district. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Yeah. So in seat A, Steve Birch, the incumbent, is winning. In seat B, Jake Ellis, the incumbent, is losing, and so that's kind of an interesting thing. We'll see if that pans out. We've still got some time to go on those results, but boy, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, that's something I do not have an explanation for.
Yeah, because people would have
I'll
to
maybe
split
text
the ballot,
Isabel,
right?
see if she knows.
Yeah. This is why we hoped Isabel would join us, but she didn't. What else should we look at, guys?
One thing I'd like to take a look at is Paulette Jordan's vote numbers. I'm curious to see how that is kind of stacking up against her 2018 performance. I know she conceded earlier in the night, about an hour ago, but I'm curious to see if she is on track to outperform or underperform what she did previously.
Yeah, and there's how that looks right now. Jim Risch, the Republican incumbent, longtime Idaho politician, handily winning that race right now.
Yeah, I saw that.
What does that look like compared to 2018?
I looked it up before we got on this broadcast, so I was prepared. And it looks like she earned roughly 223,000 votes. Last year, if I had that number down correctly, 231,000 votes. So as of now, we still have more precincts to gather, but keep that 231,000 number in mind if you're curious to see how Paulette Jordan did. I know she's picked up a lot of national attention, but is still kind of not really moved the needle on Democratic politics here in the state.
Yeah, and this is the look in just Aydah County, and right now Jim Risch is topping Paulette Jordan in the county. For Paulette to win over Jim, she has to really run up the score in places like Aydah County and Blaine County, and right now that's not happening. As you said, it sounds like she conceded, so I think that one's probably over. But yeah, it is interesting, and will she run for governor again in 2 years? I think we're going to have a primary fight for Governor Little, at least it looks like it. And so what will that look like? And then how does that go into the general election in 2 years? I think that's going to be something that politicos in Idaho will be watching closely.
Definitely, and I saw that in her concession speech, she said that she would return, that Idahoans would see her again. So we don't know what that would look like. I saw that on Betsy Russell's blog, Ion Boise. We don't know what that's going to look like, or in what role she would return. But I think that for Paulette Jordan fans, I think she will pop up.
It's interesting because you have this kind of dynamic too, where she has run a couple times, has gotten quite a bit of attention, but has obviously not attained office. What does she run for next? Does she look at a non-gubernatorial statewide office? Obviously, she can't run against Jim Risch again for 6 years, so that one's out of the question. Does she run in that governor's primary? I don't know. It's going to be interesting. When she says she's going to run again, what is it that's going to take? Especially as Margaret, you said, if she underperforms what she did 2 years ago tonight, it's going to be interesting, I would say.
Can we look at that District 15 again? Has there been any movement there?
Yeah, I'm going to do a refresh on this. And
well, while you're doing that, Don, I wanted to mention just real quick, I'm kind of surprised with the down ballot voting, just the number of votes for something like, say, judges. Just looking at Canyon County, it looks like they're right around 60,000 votes right now counted from what I'm looking at, and about 55,000 votes and say for those judges to confirm them or deny them. So, that's
it's an interesting
over
thing,
80% of the people who were voting ended up casting a vote for judges. And let me tell you, it's tough to find information on those judges.
We took some requests, and BoiseDev wasn't big enough this year to track down all those judicial races. But yeah, I mean, people like to be educated voters, right? And you go into those polls and you like to know what you're voting for. And I personally skipped a bunch of them because I was trying to do research. I'm like, I don't know. There's like one judge that I knew of and knew that person's character, and so I was like, okay, I'll vote for that one. But the rest, what do you do? And so I think it is an interesting quirk of our system. And these judges don't campaign. There's no, they don't spend money. It's a yes or no, but people don't know. They don't know what decisions they've made. They don't know what their philosophy is. And it is kind of something that I think maybe needs some attention to. So,
yeah, I would, if we can pull those up at any point too, I'd be interested in that. There were a couple of judges on the list this year that had presided over pretty controversial cases. It would be interesting to see.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, I'll look. Is it Kira Dale?
Is that
she was?
That might be a canyon. I'm not seeing that here. Oh yeah, here it is. Magistrate Kira Dale. Yep. Go ahead, Meredith. Here's the result.
So she's the judge that heard the case about the 18-year-old man who accidentally discharged his firearm at the Capitol during a rally a few months ago, if you guys remember. But it doesn't look like that's impacted, she seems to be doing well, as I imagine most, like you've said. I think a lot of people just go down the list and click yes. And so it seems to mirror, the results are kind of all similar. So maybe people didn't have access to that information.
And she's really not, she's underperforming her peers, but not by a lot. They're all kind of in the same ballpark, and she's actually overperforming some. So I would say that didn't break through for people.
Right. And Meredith, yeah, again, we talked about that before, that nationally, especially with a lot of these movements regarding reform of the justice system, they've reminded people that, hey, you vote to confirm these judges. So if you see a decision being made by a judge that you vehemently disagree with, they're probably going to be on your ballot and make your voice heard. So again, I've been surprised by the number of people who cast their vote for a judge so many years. When I was on an island in the ballot box, I'm like, I have no idea. So I just skipped it. But these folks seem to have done the research or just been confident enough in those decisions being made in their community. They're like, yeah, it's fine. So
okay,
there's
so
District 15 again.
Yeah, let's look at our close races. District 15, not a whole lot of change here. Fred S. Martin, the incumbent, is still out ahead of Rick Just, but not by a lot. In Seat A, Steve Birch, the Democratic incumbent, is leading challenger Patrick McDonald. And then in Seat B, the Democratic incumbent Jake Ellis is actually in second place to Cody Galloway, and that is with 12 of 16 precincts reporting there.
Let's check back in on the Locciondo race. I'm really wondering about that.
Okay, let me do a refresh here, and we'll load that up. Well, you guys, I should probably be on camera too, so you can.
It is interesting, though. It really is a conversation about these incumbents battling so hard, like you said. It's really surprising to me to see some of that. A few years ago, that wasn't the case. If you were the incumbent, you were pretty almost guaranteed. It was like nobody wanted to challenge the incumbent. And I think we've really been disrupted in the last couple of year or so to see where it goes.
Commissioner Locciondo holds a 53 vote lead right now.
Whoa.
In her seat.
Goodness gracious.
And that, I believe, is within the margin of a recount. Obviously, not all the results are in. Precincts on this one, 100 of 151 precincts, so we've got a ways to go.
80% turnout right now. That's incredible.
Right, and I think that is just the story of the day here. People are engaged all across the political spectrum, but in Aydah County, the What was the final turnout in the municipal races last year? I mean,
I remember. I know we were shooting for. It was like we would be happy with 35%, like that, and I think it ended up being maybe slightly higher than that, but not 80%.
If I remember right, it got near 40. I'm pretty sure.
I think that's right too. But yeah, it's incredible. 80% turnout. That's really great.
I'm cheating again, and I'm looking to see what that turnout was. I think that, and the interesting thing about that municipal race was turnout increased in the runoff, which yeah. So I'm trying to find.
Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but normal municipal turnout, isn't that like 20%, maybe below that? At least
it's definitely below. I just looked it up. So we cleared 40, just barely cleared 40% in the municipal election in 2019, and that was amazing. I've covered municipal races in my career where everyone gets excited when you break 10% turnout.
Yeah.
I mean, so when I saw that 40%, that 40% number, my eyes about popped out of my head, because it was insane just how many people that you just went places. You'd be in the coffee shop and you hear people talking about who they wanted to vote for in the mayoral election, and that warms a reporter's heart, obviously. But I think it really says a lot about where we are in the Valley, that people are trying to figure out how to make change in their community and fix issues that we have. And I think that speaks to the fact that people are starting to feel there's a level of discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
Uncomfort isn't a word. Discomfort, and because people head to the polls when they're upset. Nobody heads to, unless it's a presidential race or something like in municipal races. Nobody goes to the polls whenever they're happy and they're just feeling like, man, I love everything about my situation. And I think that speaks to a lot of the angst over property taxes. Public transit, as we've discussed a lot tonight, and just a array of issues related to growth and development and affordable housing, rents. The list goes on and on. And I think that I don't see this dropping off in Aydah County, anytime soon. I don't see this as Aydah County goes to sleep next year. I think people are going to stay engaged.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting coming into this day is we knew that voter turnout was going to crush all the records, and I always wondered, where will these voters that have been hiding from us, which way are they going to go? Are we going to see a huge wave one way or the other from these voters that we really haven't heard from in some time, or maybe ever? But turns out they're all just as divided as the rest of us that have been engaged voters all along, which has just further complicated things.
But I think there's a theme for the night in Aydah County, Canyon County, Idaho, and across the nation. Whether you win or lose, whether your candidate wins or loses, the turnout is so huge. I mean, you just got to say, look, it's just the will of the people. And this is the way the voting, this is the way our system was supposed to work, where everybody voted and those votes were counted, and we heard who the people really wanted in there. So again, that may be small comfort if you were counting on a certain result and you didn't get it, but at least you can say, well, everybody got their voice heard. This is what they wanted. So we'll see where we go from here. And Margaret, it's interesting. You talked about people being upset in Boise, which sort of drove them to the polls. As a guy who, again, grew up in this area, moved away for a few years, realized his mistake, and came back, like Boise is still, and Aydah County and the Treasure Valley, Canyon County, Idaho, a really special and incredible place. And comparatively, as we talked about before, traffic's great. Property taxes are great. All that's great. But as Meredith talked about, compared to 5-10 years ago. No, it's headed in the wrong direction. So I guess in that way, you have to give credit to Ada County, Canyon County voters that are seeing the trends and understanding, well, these are things we need to get turned around, or it's just going to get much worse where, this isn't nearly as attractive a place to people moving into, or just to people who already live here than it is now.
If you heard the
No,
honking
and
sound in the background, Justin, nobody was upset. It was my dog Lola with her hedgehog. So that's what that was. Margaret, go ahead.
Say, I think that you're right. It is these trends shifting as quality of life is kind of changing as the Treasure Valley and Boise becomes more of we're getting big city problems. We're getting metro area problems. And I think that one of the reasons that this has become such a flashpoint is because it's not just that it's shifting. It's that it's shifting faster than we can keep up with it. I mean, we're looking at there's places on the bench where these house values have increased. We're seeing assessments increase double digits year over year. And that's thinking about someone, this isn't just your house value kind of slowly increasing as you start to make a little bit more money. This is someone, these are people who maybe bought their house for a very low amount of money, 30, 40 years ago. They're on a fixed income, and then their property taxes just went like this overnight. And I think that it's not just the change, it's the pace of that change, especially since our wages are not growing at the same pace as some of this cost of living, and people are doing the math on their budgets, and nothing will drive you to the polls faster than not being able to worrying about paying your bills.
Yeah, I mean, I met on the
just weighed in via text, and she's like, "Wow, Locciondo and Arnold. I mean, those are the big stories tonight, for sure."
It's very close. Can we revisit them again? Has there been any movement?
We have, and that's so. I've been watching the Ada County clerk's website, and this number right here, 100 of 151 precincts, it has been what it has been for quite a while. And in fact, if it doesn't update here in the next little bit, we'll probably wrap up a little bit early because we just don't have anything new. Let me go look at that commission race one more time. And it's stuck. I mean, it's that 53 vote margin right now. And I'm sure if you're Melanie Falwell, who is running Diana Locciondo's campaign and is running the Alexis Pickering campaign, you're like, wow, these are the closest results that they could possibly be.
Yeah, I mean, these races are. This is really going to be a major decider of what the next couple years look like in Ada County.
The CHD race in a bit, but Rebecca Arnold is now back on top by a grand total of 8 minus 3, 5 votes.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So we're not calling a lot of races before we sign off tonight.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely is going to be a matter of. We'll hopefully look for the results in the morning. We'll see how late Margaret and I stay up.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, we can probably pretty much call every legislative race except for District 15 right now. Let me check back in on 15. That's, again, what an anomaly, Don. You pointed it out that it's the same district, same voters. Steve Birch, the Democrat in Representative Seat A, has a 52 to 47% lead over the Republican. Birch is the incumbent. In Seat B, it's pretty much the inverse. Even though the situation is exactly the same, the incumbent, Jake Ellis, is trailing by about 3 percentage points to the Republican, Cody Galloway. There was a third-party candidate in Seat A. That may be some of the problem for McDonald, that he might have stolen some of the votes away. But still, the votes for Birch are the same as they are for the Republican in Seat B at 51%.
Well, it's uncanny. The numbers are the same. Steve Birch has 10,994 votes in Seat A. and Cody Galloway has 10,951 in seat B. And this has got to come down to, Meredith, you campaigned last year. I mean, do you think this comes down to maybe campaigning and what they did? Because people had to...
I have no idea. I mean, I campaigned really hard as I ever could have. And I personally knocked on like 6,500 doors. It was basically all I did. I felt like it was the only thing I could control. So that's all I did all the time. I met so many people. And it didn't work out for me, and it was really close, but it didn't work out. So certainly, and we heard on that other race, that he didn't really campaign, not on my race, on a different race. He didn't really campaign that hard, and he's still sneaking up for a considerable margin. So, I unfortunately don't have the secret sauce.
We've got some news here. We've got about 12 more precincts, and Ryan Davidson has pulled out to a lead in the county commission race over Diana Locciondo by several thousand votes. So we'll see if that holds. We've got a ways to go, and it's very difficult with the interface to tell where the vote is coming from. But that is a potential flip there of that seat. In the other county commission seat, Rod Beck is on top pretty handily at this point. And then if we go over to the Aydah County Highway District seats, we need to look at the correct seat here. This is Rebecca Arnold and Alexis Pickering, and it is interesting. Still basically 50-50 right on the nose.
Wow.
Rebecca Arnold now has a bit of a lead, not more than about 20 votes.
Wow.
These are
this is something
important to vote.
This is something we talked about after the mayoral election, when Mayor Beater was going for his fourth term, that he sort of, again, as a guy who had moved away and was grateful to move back to Boise, was like, man, things are going great here. There's no way he can lose. But people who had been here for, over that stretch were like, nah, again, the trends I don't like. So he was sort of term limited out, even though we don't have that. Is that something that's happening to Rebecca Arnold here? Because, nobody likes traffic, and that's sort of what ACHD controls. Margaret, any ideas?
Well, I think that this race is so hard to figure out exactly why people were voting the way that they were. And transportation policy is so hard to understand. I think that it's going to be interesting to see what the reactions are from people after, because I think that this issue of traffic and how to improve that situation, how to make it better, it's so hard to do. And it's something that you can't do overnight. It's something you can't do in a term. And it makes you wonder, okay, everyone's upset about the direction of roads in Aydah County. Everyone's, nobody likes driving around here anymore. Why do we see 16-year incumbents, continue to earn big votes? Like Jim Hansen, he's a contrarian. He wants to do something different. But he's still, Caravate's point was he's been on there for 3 terms and hasn't gotten anything done. Nothing's better. And so I'm really kind of curious how that incumbent effect works, and especially in ACHD whenever no one's happy with what's going on.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up, and let's do some final thoughts. Let's start with Meredith.
Oh, I'm just as excited as I was when we first tuned in. I feel like there's still a lot to know. It's going to still be a late night, or for me an early morning probably, but I don't know. Hang in there for all the eager residents and voters who are waiting to see. I think finally that patience warning has come in handy, and we'll have to keep our patience to see what happens. And to the candidates, just hang in there. I know it's a really stressful time for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Justin?
Well, Meredith, I'm sure you know all about that, and I can't even imagine what you went through last year. So again, my heart goes out to you. You worked so dang hard. Full disclosure, I voted for you. But anyway, moving on.
And I did before we did this, I asked Meredith to watch the show that Justin and Isabel and I did last
Just
year.
to hear from me.
Which was pretty mean, I think, because, I think watching the autopsy of your race is probably tough, but we really appreciate you being here, being such a trooper, because that's...
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much. It's really great to be with you all here tonight.
Yeah, Justin, your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts specifically, again, on the state house, all the legislative races went pretty much to chalk, exactly how we expected, except for 15, which... goodness gracious, who knows? West Boise, keep it weird. But also, I think just the turnout has been amazing, and it warms my heart, and I just love to see it.
And Margaret, what do you got?
I'm just going to echo the sentiment of the other two. I mean, the turnout here is just, it blows you away. The fact that this many people are coming out and getting engaged in these races. I think the takeaway from tonight is the Locciondo race and the Arnold race is tight. And, I'm sure anyone that has strong feelings in that area who didn't go out and vote is probably kicking themselves right now, because these races, there's, whatever happens in Washington, that's going to impact people. That's going to have an effect for sure. But, these races here in determining what your roads look like, what your property tax bill is, and what it's used for. If inmates in the Aydah County Jail are going to sleep on the floor, or there's going to be enough beds for everyone. That's really what folks are voting on this time. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind, of just like, the Washington race, that is important. I'm not saying it's not, but these are some really hardcore local races, and it's really cool to see people engaging on them in the way that they are.
Margaret Carmel, Justin Core, Meredith Stead, I enjoyed this. I really appreciate it. If you're watching and you're like, well, but the results, we're going to have them for you. We'll have them up on BoiseDev.com. Hopefully they close here pretty quick. But we really appreciate you all joining us. And
we are now going to switch over to BoiseDev 2, and we'll be with you through the morning. No.
24 BoiseDev?
Right.
I vote no on that.
That is a flashback. Everybody... Oh, Justin, thanks. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a good night.
This BoiseDev presentation is presented by Holland & Hart, a full-service AmLaw 200 firm delivering integrated legal solutions to local, regional, national, and international clients of all sizes. Their Boise office has deep roots in Idaho, with sophisticated experience to handle the most complex issues.